Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that lively conversation, discussion around feminist coalition building and how it intersects with patriarchy. I'm really impressed that you were able to tease out some of the nuances around feminism and identify that feminism means different things for different groups of women. And you connected that to patriarchy and what it actually means from the micro, macro, and meso level. So I'm going to be commenting on those two aspects of your conversation: feminism and what it looks like for different groups of women, and patriarchy and how it intersects with feminism for different women. So the first thing is, when we talk about feminism, yes, we understand that feminism is different for different groups of women, but actually, even when we say that, I believe that we continue to use the same white feminist lens with only addition or add on to make the difference between women. So I'll explain. And I'll explain using patriarchy. So when we talk about patriarchy, we use the same lens. We look at patriarchy from the perspective of white women in terms of their opportunities or lack of opportunities in relation to white men. This is not the case for different groups of women. Let me explain further. For example, when we look at patriarchy, we think that white women are disadvantaged, or women are disadvantaged because they don't have access to certain kinds of jobs. They're inferiorized in terms of their opportunities in the job market. The labor that they provide at home in terms of caregiving is seen as not important, and they're not given any kind of credit. But here is the thing to remember about that. There are different racialized groups of people where men and women actually do some of the same kinds of work. So, for example, large institutions, hospitals, for example, Black men and women do similar types of work in terms of cleaning. The cleaners in those places, for the most part, if they're in large urban centers, cleaners and orderlies tend to be Black people. During slavery, Black women and men worked on the plantations together. So this is what we actually need to understand, is that if you use this lens around what patriarchy looks like for women, you're actually only adding on from the perspective of white people what it means for everyone else. And it's not the case. So for example, if you talk to women from rural Newfoundland, ask them what they did and how they did it and how their work was similar or different to the men. And ask Indigenous women as well about the kind of work they do on the land and what it looks like in relation to the men. Those are very important distinctions to make in terms of patriarchy and how it shows up for different people. Now, here's another nuance to consider. In the colonial white world, when we identify patriarchy and we talk about the division of labor and how cleaning, for example, is relegated to women's work because it's really not that important, what does it mean when we have different group of men that are cleaning professionally for a living? How do you reconcile that with division of labor? and patriarchy in terms of what men are supposed to do or expected to do and what they're not. I'll leave that question with you to sort of ponder. With respect to patriarchy, the other thing I'd like to say is when you begin to think about feminist coalition building, women do borrow from patriarchy. And this is how it shows up, is that different groups of women are the leaders. Their faces are the ones that are on TV, on radio doesn't have face, but they're the ones that's being interviewed. They're the ones that's out there in the media. So they have taken on the leadership roles. They're doing the decision making. They're the ones that's directing everything and how these coalitions work. That's a piece that's taken directly out of patriarchy in terms of how leadership is supposed to be and what it looks like when people are strong and are in charge. But the other thing that happens in feminist coalition building is the tension around who speaks for who and why. And so I can say to you, at this very moment, in St. John's, Newfoundland, there are some tensions around some feminist organizations who want to really center themselves in the anti-Black racist movement. And so that there has been some strategic conversations with some of those feminist organizations around what it means to take leadership from people who are Black around issues having to do with Black Lives Matter. And so how this shows up, for example, is that people want to hold rallies on their own, using their own agenda, without consulting, collaborating, partnering with Black people. And also, how this shows up is when there's an opportunity for a speaking engagement, for example, rather than, as they would say, passing the mic to somebody who has lived experience with anti-Black racism, they center themselves in the conversation. And then they talk about how they also have limitations within certain kinds of systems. So it's really important for us to understand that coalition building is tricky in lots of ways, but it gets even trickier when people think that they have great ideas that they want to bring forward. And so it's as much work to ask people to step back as it is to ask people to collaborate and work with other community organizations when they're trying to build coalition. And the last thing I'd like to leave you with is to consider this. When you're trying to build feminist coalitions, how do you center yourselves or not center yourselves? And this is for you personally. You might not have had any experience in coalition building, but you've had experience with building partnerships, being a part of a community organization, being a part of a class. How do you center yourself or not center yourself? And if you can think of when you do not center yourself, and if you know that it was done purposely, then I'd like for you to consider why that strategy was important for you to do. Because this is what everything hangs onto, is whether or not people who are eager, willing, and able to participate in coalition building, if they can actually decenter themselves from those conversations and decenter themselves from the agenda. And if they do that, what would success look like? So that's what I'd like to leave you with today. Thank you.